The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Alrighty, folks. Hello and welcome to the Monday edition of the Whitfield Report podcast. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, joined here by Gabe and Adam Hill of American Watchmen, which I guess we're kind of rebooting, sort of a little bit, merging with RTO Media a bit, but, irregardless, it's great to be here with both these gentlemen. Both Gabe and Adam were part of our election night live stream for Right to Offend Media, along with Josh, and we had a great live stream that night, but I haven't had a chance to talk to either of these gentlemen about the election since then, at least not on air. So I just figured, usually the Monday show isn't political, but since we'll be doing the live stream on Wednesday and it's Thanksgiving, I figured I'd do the political show on Monday this week. So, gentlemen, I want to welcome you both back to the show. And just what do you guys think of how the election turned out in general? First off,
Adam, do you want to go first?
That was everything I was hoping to be. Honestly, by the end of our live stream on election night, I'm like, oh yeah, we won, we got this. Like as soon as you see the like North Carolina, Trump, and then you start seeing all the swing states going, and I'm like, it's done.
Yeah.
I did notice another note. Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin actually had a massive vote dump late in the evening for Kamala Harris. And if you look at the vote curve, you can see the massive dump of votes. It went from it was like a straight up, but even that wasn't enough to overtake Trump's victory in Wisconsin. It was hilarious.
That was the one thing that had worried me the entire night was, I think we're all kind of in the same boat, that there definitely was a fuckery about with the 2020 election. And so Max, my co-host, was extremely confident that Trump was going to win this one. And I was I'd love to say that I was confident, but unfortunately because of 2020, I was cautiously optimistic, because I figured that they were going to all of a sudden get all these votes for Kamala that just showed up at 3 a.m. in the morning. So I think both you guys had left, but Max and I we stayed up until 6 in the morning basically to just make sure that that everything actually was legit. And I mean, as Adam mentioned, there was some vote dumps for Kamala, but thankfully, if you're a Trump supporter, this election really was too big to rig, and I think that has to go. I think there are a lot of factors surrounding that, but I mean, Josh, you and I were talking about the economy before we started, and so Yeah.
I mean, it was just the margins like that. That's what I was watching on election night, because in some states like North Carolina, like the Raleigh area reports first, and then all the rural areas come in, and then all the late ballots get counted, and it's kind of the same way for Georgia. So the bigger the margin Trump had before that dump, the better it was for Trump. So as we started to get later into our live stream, and it got later into the night and more votes came in, the more I was confident, simply because, Trump having a 4% margin at some point in Pennsylvania, there's no way that Philly's going to drop enough votes to be able to compensate for that. But I will say those late vote dumps, like, they flipped the Senate races in Michigan and Wisconsin.
Yes, they did.
So now we have
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, like McCormick. I mean, I got to give hats off to McCormick for upsetting Casey, and it has to be considered an upset, because the Casey name in Pennsylvania is basically like political royalty.
Yeah.
So like he was the one who ran closest to Trump in any of the swing states. So that was exciting to see. But I do have to say, like, I think the biggest disappointment of the night and for the election is the down ballot results for Republicans, which is somewhat Trump's doing, and then somewhat Republicans doing, and then just somewhat demographics. But it's it's kind of the catch 22 of Republicans becoming this multiracial coalition, which is their vote now is actually, they have pockets of votes in Philly and Detroit and New York City. The problem is it's not enough to get them any seats. And it's not quite enough yet to swing like a statewide Senate race in, New York or New Mexico yet. That may change in time. So I'm looking at the long-term trends beyond just election night, and
Same.
whether it really was unique to Trump, which I do think some of it is, and whether some of those long-term trends extend just beyond the state of Florida and Texas. Like, I think Florida and Texas are in their own a kind of arena at this point. Like, I think
Right.
they're solidly red, but I want to see if that continues to extend into Hispanic areas in Pennsylvania and Arab areas in Michigan and Hispanic areas in Arizona. And that's something that we'll see, in 2026 and beyond.
Well,
I tell you, one thing that surprised the living heck out of me was that Trump won the Native American vote. 64% of Native Americans voted Trump this time around.
Yep. Yeah, that is super impressive. It was funny growing up, because I grew up in Eastern Washington, and there are a couple reservations, and they have big casinos on them. And my parents and I used to joke all the time, like, "Oh yeah, they're 90-10." Because like the 5% owns the casino, and then they give everybody else like the proceeds from the casino. So it's just like, we'll take the handouts. But I mean, I think that follows along with the realignment of a lot of these different demographics. And I think it's generational too. Ironically, I think a lot of the younger minority vote, whether they be younger blacks, younger Native Americans, Hispanics, Asians, they're actually more conservative than their older parents.
I would agree with that, and I think that kind of goes along with what Gabe, you and I were talking about before the show, and my Wednesday host Max and I, we talk about this a lot too. Is all this woke politics? I think the left is finally starting to realize that it really really the only demographic that it appeals to is wealthy people, and not just that, but like especially white
Mm-hmm.
elitist
Yeah.
wealthy people. You see,
Yeah.
even most like minority demographics who may vote like Democrat in the past or may have voted Democrat in the past. The thing it is that I think a lot of conservatives often forget is even though they vote Democrat, ironically they're socially conservative, and that's the thing that in the past it's kind of been like a big head scratcher from many on the right is, well, if they're socially conservative, then why do they keep voting Democrat? And I think for a long time that's because the Democrat Party was really like, their core demographic was like the working class and really like more economic issues. And now, really, since the rise of Obama, it's really been the party of the elites. And
the elite, the educated, the wealthy, the like all of that, big corporations, big pharma.
Yeah.
The Democrats are now the party of the big corps and the elite.
And it also, and I'll piggyback to this because I think that it's not contrarian, but my view is that there were two things really for minorities for this election, which was one, Trump had to there had to be a situation where many of these voters had permission to vote for a Republican. And I think that the woke politics, the economic situation finally gave them permission to do it. Like if you're a longtime older Hispanic voter, you could finally be like, this DEI crap, I'm done. I'm not voting for Kamala this time. And then the second part of that, compounding it, is the generational change.
yeah,
Like that's the best example. I have like two examples of this. The first is like the younger black voter and the older black voter. So the older black voter grew up in the civil rights era, which was moderate change consistently, bit by bit, that benefited their community over time. So they saw that, they were like, this is great, like, moderate politics, moderate, economic liberalism, progressivism. But so they saw that over time. But the younger black voter doesn't have that context. The younger black voter is growing up under the same economic struggles that we all are. So they can hear about it from their elders and read it in a textbook. Really, to them, doesn't make their day-to-day life better, whereas it made that older black voter's life better consistently, and they remember it. And the second example I can think of for a Hispanic voter is the Houston Tribune or Houston Chronicle in Texas. They did a story in the Rio Grande Valley like a week ago after the election. And so they were talking to younger and older Hispanic voters about like why they switched their votes or who they voted for. And there was a younger Hispanic guy in an article that they referenced. And the younger Hispanic guy was like, I grew up my entire life hearing that Democrats are for the poor. What if I don't want to be poor anymore? And and to me, that encapsulates the issue that Democrats have with younger minorities that are not already aligned with their party. Like they're basically growing up under the equivalent of like the Great Recession that we grew up under. And to be fair, it shaped millennial politics for a long, long time. And I think this woke politics kind of thing, this neoliberal Democratic Party, I think it's having the same effect on Gen Z and kind of in between Gen Z and millennial younger voters.
Not just that, but specifically in relation to, I think, the African American population, or the black vote, whatever you want to call them. I have a lot of friends who are young black men who, when we were teenagers, in junior high and high school, a lot of them were really enthralled by Obama. They saw him as a role model. We were all told that him being the first black president was going to be, a milestone, and it was going to like really fix race relations. And in hindsight, like that clearly wasn't the case. If anything, race relations were, set back a couple of, decades actually. And then I think, and some of that, like, okay, I think, people were putting expectations on Obama that maybe he couldn't have fulfilled. I'm willing to give him the benefit of that doubt on that. But what I'm not willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on is, and you really saw this towards the end of the election, was when he was basically scolding young black men and saying, you know, Trump didn't, you know, make the great economy. He inherited mine, and, you know, and shame on you guys for basically, you know, enjoying his economy, and now you better be good boys and all vote for Kamala. And
do what we tell you to do.
Well, then of course
Yeah.
you see what, and then you see why. I mean, you see why you had a large spike in black male voters for Trump this time around, because, you know, Trump went to the inner cities. He went to like barber shops, and he went to like community centers and actually sat down and talked to the black community and asked them questions and genuinely was interested in what they had to say. Kamala, I mean, yeah, sure, she sent Obama to do her quote unquote dirty work, but Kamala largely abandoned the black male voter base altogether.
Well, so a couple of things on that. Like, the thing with Trump is, even before he entered politics, Trump was always the guy who was like getting along with urban, you know, with like urban culture. I mean, rappers for, you know, 35 years were all like making songs. So like, Trump has always had good relations with the African American and a lot of other minority.
I mean, shoot, he won that Rosa Parks Award. I mean,
Yeah, he was actually awarded that, you know, by Al Sharpton, like back in the 90s, if I'm not. But I mean, the other thing, so I mean, I could do a whole episode, you know, about like what went wrong with Kamala's campaign, but like, but ultimately, I think Kamala's biggest problem was she really didn't show up at all. She had no policy really to speak of, like, at all. And then, like, when she did do interviews, unless they were completely softball interviews, she couldn't answer even like the most, you know, basic question. And I think a lot of people like just saw the fact that she wasn't willing to do like any media or anything like that. And then also, like, she had the issue of, you know, she tried to distance herself from Biden, but yet she's also Biden's VP. And so she was in a catch-22 where she had to admit that some of Biden's policies were bad, but she also couldn't untangle herself from Biden's economy.
Well, I mean, she didn't say his policies were bad. Like if you remember, they asked, like, in that one interview, they asked her, like, if you were the president, would you have changed anything that Biden did? And she said no.
No.
Yeah, no. She said I wouldn't change a single thing. And then it was only when she was really forced to admit that some of this, she was kind of like, well, here's what I would do differently. And then when she was asked what it was, she would stutter and, you know, lose her composure.
To me, it's, and thinking back on this, I mean, I think, I can't remember which one of your co-hosts election night mentioned it to me, but I remember we were talking about this on election night, and so I made the point, like, it's so weird that Kamala they basically they overthrew Biden, and appointed her. And so that was so easy for them. But over the next 3 months, they had such a difficult time distancing themselves from Biden. And one of your hosts made the point, it's not because she couldn't, it's because she doesn't believe any differently in actuality.
Yeah,
so she doesn't support a wall. She doesn't support gun rights. She doesn't really support like tax cuts for the middle class. Like, she doesn't support any of those things, and she's not actually a politician that is good at lying. So
right.
she can't pull a Bill Clinton and be like, I feel your pain, and this is how I'm going to distract you from what I'm not telling you. She doesn't have that skill, and so she could never pull it off, and when she tried, it just looked really, really bad. And I think her campaign team made the decision, well, we're not even going to try and hide it. Like, we're just going to try and ride this thing out to the election.
Yeah.
And it 90 days was still too long.
Well, the other thing too, believe it or not, I think that the Joe Rogan podcast that Trump did actually had more of an impact than I initially thought it would, specifically because Trump was willing to go on there and do 3 hours of, like free form conversation. Joe Rogan literally said that, like, all I wanted to do was, like, have a conversation with Kamala and really just get to know her as a person, not even have a conversation. Right. And she couldn't even do that. And she had like some ridiculous thing where, like, she wanted him to come to her and then do like a 20-minute interview or something, and you can't do that.
They said it was 1 hour. Like, he had to go to her. It was only going to be 1 hour. I think they were even going to add 1 or 2 breaks into that 1 hour, and there were certain things that he wasn't allowed to talk about.
Yeah, they gave him pre-scripted questions he had to ask, or topics that were off limits. And this is compared to, like, the fact, not only did Trump do it for 3 hours, I think Vance did the Rogan podcast for like close to 3.5 hours. I think Elon's was at least a couple hours. Like, the top people, including Trump, gave Rogan like 9 hours of content.
Even who's the, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the guy from the guy from Pennsylvania, the one who had he's a lefty, but he's kind of base at times. The guy from
Fetterman, yeah.
Even
Fetterman. I can now see why they voted for him in 22. Actually, people are like, "I love this guy. He just says the shit that we're all thinking."
Yeah, even Fetterman, who is a lefty, even he went on Rogan's podcast, and and Max made the point that if it was 2016 and Rogan had the poll that he if he had the poll then that he does now, who would have gone on Joe Rogan's podcast and maybe faked it the entire time, but Hillary Clinton would have.
Gosh.
I mean, like it or not, but Hillary Clinton is a better strategist campaign-wise than Kamala is.
Yeah. Well, I think Hillary's honestly, I think Hillary's a better politician than Kamala. I just think Hillary comes with a lot more baggage.
Well, yeah.
But I think Hillary would have gone on Rogan. Now, whether she would have done a good job, I don't know. But I think Hillary could still go on Rogan and probably do an okay job.
Yeah,
that's what surprised me about Trump. I mean, I know Trump is sharp, but like that dude's 76 freaking years old, and he was able to go on Joe Rogan and speak coherently for 3 hours without a break, nonstop, without even missing a beat.
And I think people kind of. So I know some of the post-election analysis is how, like, the Trump team went in so hard over young men. I think some of the stuff like the Rogan podcast actually got them young women, because it made Trump relatable. It made Elon relatable. It made JD Vance relatable. Like, I think it actually brought some young women into the fold, and the media can't admit that. So, like, they're always thinking like, oh, it's linear, it's just young men, and they did all this stuff to bring in young men. There are young women who listen to those podcasts, and if you are relatable, they may come out, vote for you, and be like, "Oh, you're not the devil incarnate that I heard all about."
Well,
I mean, like you remember with JD Vance, there was that one really quick interview that he did where he was talking about how much he enjoyed eating at Waffle House, and how even now, as rich as he is, he still tried to go to Waffle House to find the best way to get the cheapest meal possible. I mean, like
yeah.
he showed that he was relatable. It's like, dude, I love Waffle House.
Right.
Well, Gabe, you mentioned, how women are listening to, podcasts more and more. And that's true because as someone who's been podcasting basically like all my life since I was a teenager, like even the demographics for like this show, like the audience makeup is 60% male, but there is 40% of women
Yep.
who do listen to my show, and more than that when I have, female guests on too. But I think that's the other thing is like we're now moving into an era where millennial and Gen Z, like I don't have cable. It's all streaming. I don't know about either. I don't know about either of you, but like no one I know, unless it's like sports related, and even then, really watches television, in the sense.
Yeah,
I
I have streaming. We have our streaming services, and then I have a digital TV antenna that gives me like 8 or 9 channels that I can, if something's good on live, I can watch it. But yeah, most like
yeah,
90% of my stuff is streaming.
I mean,
yeah,
the media landscape now is very decentralized from
yeah,
what it was. And so I think a lot of people did what we did on election night. They like did their own live streams, or they hung out with friends. Like they were not the ones watching Fox News, CBS, all those places. And the fact that the media landscape now is so decentralized, I think is a good thing, because it means that people are not locked into kind of this group think box mentality. And I mean, maybe Kamala won some votes because she went on the Show Me Daddy podcast, but by the same token, like, Trump and JD, like they won some votes by going on the Joe Rogan podcast. And if that is what helps you as a voter decide, is you want the candidate to be relatable, you don't just want it to be, fire and brimstone, fate of the country every single election, that's fine. Then do that. Don't listen to the CBS and Fox News talking heads that get paid way too much money in the first place.
Well, even the call. I am glad that you brought up the Call Me Daddy podcast, because I don't listen to that podcast. Like I don't know really what it's about. But I listened to some of that one just to see like what she said, and I also listened to Kamala also on Shannon Sharp's a podcast, which I do listen to. And the thing with both those podcasts is, again, I can't speak for the Call Me Daddy podcast since I don't usually listen to it, but it was clearly very scripted, and everything was like kind of ordained. And same with the Shannon Sharp, podcast. Both of those were like very clearly rehearsed, and I think audiences now really, they know a scripted show when they see one. I think we're kind of, past the point of like reality TV. Like people know that reality TV is fake, and so that's why the internet has really grown.
Well, I think that's why Rogan is so successful in general, is because his podcast is not scripted. So,
Right.
he can have a 3-hour conversation with a candidate running for president versus a 1-hour scripted conversation with Kamala Harris on a podcast. Like, and in the end, you only get 3 or 4 substantive questions in the hour-long podcast versus like, just roll it out to me, Joe. Like, what's your question like? One, two, three, four. It's much more relatable, and it's also just much more substantive.
People also forget because now Rogan is getting like labeled as the new Rush Limbaugh, right?
Right, the new right wing.
But people forget, and Josh and I talked about this back in 2020 when it happened. But Bernie Sanders went on Joe Rogan's podcast. Whether or not you like Bernie Sanders, he had a genuine conversation with Joe, and even a lot of conservatives like myself who were never going to vote for
Mm-hmm.
Bernie. We all listened to that podcast, or I should say a lot of us, and we're like, you know what? Bernie might not be our guy, but at least he is willing to have like an authentic conversation. And it's better to hear from him in, long form format rather than, a clipped up, segmented interview. This is not to go on too much of a rant, but like I've also said this that like I think the debate format needs to change too, especially if they're only going to do one. If they're only going to do one debate now, like they've done for the past several years, where I think the debates ought to be a long form now because, and I understand that might be a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
It might be like super long, but I think really there are issues that are just like too complex to give too many answers to each. And I think Bill Burr said it best, like no one even watches the debate because like everyone's either made up their mind who they're going to vote for from the beginning, or the debates just aren't substantive enough anymore.
Yeah, and the questions that they focus on in the debates are honestly not the issues that the American people care about. Like 15 minutes of the Harris Trump debate was about abortion. That's not what people care about. Like, and we knew that from day one going into the election. Like, we knew the Democrats were going to throw the kitchen sink, including abortion, at Trump and Vance. But the thing is, having major media companies be the hosts for this, and all those hosts are biased, you know that they're going to spend 15 minutes on abortion when the main issue is the economy or censorship or foreign policy and foreign crises. Like, abortion should be a 5-minute segment. And the thing is, having a decentralized media ecosystem where candidates campaigns can essentially talk with each other and be like, okay, you know what, we're going to have a debate actually on Joe Rogan's podcast, and it's going to be 2 or 2.5 hours. Like, that makes it a lot more freewheeling for substantive discussions to occur in a debate versus being locked into like this 90-minute cable format where you have to have 2 or 3 commercial breaks. So I'm kind of excited to see what that looks like in 2028 because I'm not sure that even Fox, I mean, maybe for the primaries, but I think for the general election, I could actually see the campaigns being like, you know what, let's have a debate on Joe Rogan, or let's have a debate in an online format, and we're not going to have the major media companies host it. That would be awesome to see, in my opinion, and I think it's coming in the future one way or the other.
Even Bill Maher, who is a big lefty. I mean, his podcast that he does outside of his HBO show is wildly successful, and I even said to someone like, get someone like Tucker Carlson who is more conservative, and then get someone like Bill Maher who is more liberal, and have them both moderate, a debate, and have it be, long form, and then let the candidates, talk. And the other thing is, like, yeah, it might be long. Like most people, if they really care to listen to the whole thing, they can. And if not, they'll just like fast forward to the timestamp of the issue that they care about, and then like, hear that, and then just move on.
Yeah,
I mean, I like that because, like, instead of doing the whole, you have 90 seconds to talk. You have 60-second rebuttal. Like, I would say, you know what? Okay, the next 15 minutes are going to be about abortion. Have a conversation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even well, and that was the one thing that I hated, because I took debate in high school, at least for the first 2 years, and that was one of the things I hated. Was like there were issues, namely like abortion and even like illegal immigration, where the issues are so complex and nuanced that there's no way to have a substantive conversation about any topic, in just 15 minutes. And the other thing is, you're not really going to convince anyone, especially in this day and age, in 15 minutes about any given issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think Vance did it perfectly, and Vance has a way of like during the VP debate when he sort of like stuck it to the moderators without really sticking it to the moderators when they told him to shut up, and he's like, nope, I'm going to tell you about illegal immigration, and he went on his like 1 minute spiel about the visa system and how it kind of subverts the immigration system. And even though they turned off his mic, like he got his point across. But that is the kind of stuff for a substantive debate on illegal immigration that you can't fit into a soundbite. Like you can't say all the ways that the Biden administration has circumvented the illegal immigration or immigration rules in 30 seconds. But you can if you're given 5 or 10 minutes, and you can list off bullet point like, this is one way, this is another way, this is a third way, they defunded this. Like you can do it in that format. And I think that's partially what Americans were so frustrated with the debates, and actually why they, as another example, why they kept saying after the first debate with Trump, and then after every like town hall that Kamala did, which is, we still have no idea what she believes, because she never had to get outside of her comfort zone and actually give a substantive policy discussion beyond like a one liner.
Well, in the
I mean, if you remember too, she didn't even she had 0 policy points on her website until literally the night before the first debate.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
well,
do remember that.
Well, I also, if you guys remember back to like earlier over the summer too, back when NBC did they did like the unofficial debate between Biden and Trump, which everyone thought was going to, to be that it was going to be rigged for Joe, and it was, but I mean, that was really what led to his down. But like I remember, people forget this, but like one of the moderators asked Trump to explain, why he wasn't going to repeal Obamacare, even though he'd been critical of it. And Trump basically said, well, I do want to repeal Obamacare and replace it with Trumpcare. And then one of the moderators asked him, well, okay, so what would that look like? And Trump, to his credit, basically said, well, I'd love to explain it to you guys, but it's so complex that I'm not going to be able to explain it in under 5 minutes. So I'm not even going to to bother. And
that's kind of the concepts of the plan, which I know became a meme and like a liberal talking point for the Harris Trump debate. But
yeah,
that's literally all you can say is like, I have concepts of a plan, because you guys won't actually give me enough time to even discuss a core concept of a plan in the first place.
Right.
I mean, and to his credit, on top of that, I really admired the fact that he said, we're looking at coming up with a plan. However, if we can't come up with something better, we'll make Obamacare as good as we can.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if there was a substantive conversation about healthcare, it would not just focus on Obamacare, but it would also focus on Medicare. It would focus on Medicaid. Then you start to get into conversations about like block grants to the states or how states are funded. You would get into Medicaid expansion for all the states. Like, it is not a simple conversation that you can encapsulate into 5 minutes. Like, there are so many policy frameworks and so many variables that go into it that this is why policy analysts galore like have a career in this kind of stuff, because there's so many variables to it. And to expect somebody in 5 minutes to be like, oh yeah, this is my healthcare plan and it encapsulates everything. Like, it's disingenuous to make healthcare simply be about Obamacare,
Yeah.
because Obamacare is not the entire healthcare system.
Yeah, well, and as someone who is in a wheelchair and who has had to, since I've been an adult, use Medicaid, like the one thing I can tell you for sure is that like there are so many loopholes, and the biggest thing is no matter which side of the aisle you're on, like Medicaid just in of itself, there's so much bureaucracy to it that just as as a client or a customer or whatever you want to call me, a recipient, it's like it's too complex for like the end user to know like how to navigate. So
Yeah.
is
I mean, if I had my wish for healthcare for Obamacare, like either repealing or revising Obamacare, it would be to get rid of all these healthcare networks,
yeah,
because I mean, and that was how Obama and Democrats got the insurance companies on board, because it basically was one form of a government subsidy for these insurance companies because it's a
yeah,
guaranteed market in certain areas. I would get rid of that because that has proven to be a disaster for lots of people. Like my situation is I work for a university in Washington, so all my providers are up in Pullman, Washington. I live in Lewiston, Idaho, so I have to drive up
right,
an hour to see somebody who's covered in my network. I know that's even worse in places like New Hampshire and Maine that are remote. It's basically a subsidy to the insurance companies that distorts the market. I mean, out of all the things in Obamacare, that should be the one thing that gets repealed. It wouldn't destroy Obamacare, but the insurance companies definitely wouldn't like it. But that's because it's a subsidy for them.
the
But that doesn't mean that you're repealing every aspect of Obamacare or destroying like the entire healthcare system. You're making it better as opposed to just blowing up the whole thing, which is, if you watch the debates, like that's what it is. You're
right.
repealing Obamacare and everything else, or you're for universal health care.
We listen. We've talked more about healthcare in these last few minutes comprehensively
Right?
than the candidates were allowed to talk to in the debate, and I think that's really kind of where this came down to is it's just the media landscape I think is changing, and like a lot of these like I think just the debates and the corporate media interviews, I think that whole structure is changing and kind of just I don't know if it will ever go out of the I don't know if it'll ever disappear completely, but it's certainly like going the way of radio, in
Yeah.
terms of,
I mean, I think like TV stations for like the MSNBCs, the Fox News. I think they'll always be around, but I don't think that they'll have the same power that they did like in the early 2000s or mid 2010s or whatever, when they were at their zenith. And like I said,
yeah,
I ultimately think that's a good thing, which is kind of gets into like one of the things that Vance made the point of at his debate with Tim Walz was like, well, do you care about censorship when Google's doing it? Because Google has the ability to censor what goes on YouTube, and they do it all the time. They have the ability to manipulate their algorithms and what you see.
yep,
I think that's the new battlefield for media, because
Yeah.
it can be manipulated in unseen ways, versus we can all look at MSNBC and go, those people are crazy. Like we know what they're telling us is nuts. Whereas you can't necessarily see that with Google.
I think the big thing I think the big thing with that whole thing, and it's interesting because you're starting to see the populist right and the populist left align on this also, is the corporate monopolies on things, specifically in regards to YouTube. It's funny because like I live stream on Rumble now exclusively, and I know people think that Rumble is like some right wing echo chamber, and it might be for right now, but the company is actually like pretty neutral for the most part as far as like who they allow on. The problem is that like all these channels, even some liberal ones, have been kicked off of YouTube. So where are we to go now? They have such monopoly that really Rumble or Odyssey is the only place that we can go
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of gets into what you and I were talking about before we went on air, Sam, which was about how some of the things that, if this is done under a Trump administration, under his departments when he's in charge, that the left would love it if it was done under Biden or Harris. And if Trump and his department selections, if they actually do go after some of these agencies like Google for their monopolies or manipulating algorithms or whatever, will the left actually be like, that's a good thing and that's something that we can actually support Republicans and the president on? Or will it actually just be, it's being done under, dictator, fascist, pick your whatever negative label you want to put on him, and we're going to
Yeah,
oppose it. And that'll be, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I mean, I think Bernie Sanders is principled enough that he actually would, and he has the street cred to do it with his supporters. But I don't know about the writ large Democratic Party yet.
yeah. I mean, that's a wait and see type of thing, right? Because
Mhm.
you already have like the corporate media, especially the View. I'm sure you've seen the memes of the ladies at the View called Joe Rogan like a dragon believer or something like that, because they don't understand that they don't understand, or they don't care that he's the biggest voice in media. They're pissed that he gave Trump an endorsement, and I guess in their mind that's why Trump won. And
Well,
so,
half of them also think it's because we're racist. So
well, yeah. But anyway, kind of moving on, Gabe, I know you mentioned Trump's appointment, so that's kind of where I want to shift. Adam, I know you have to go here soon. Just what are your thoughts, Adam? I'll let you go first on what what do you think of Trump's appointments so as far as who he's appointed to his
So
cabinet?
I'm a big fan of, I'd say, all of them except I was not the biggest fan of Gates when he was picked, but I'm very, very happy with Pam Bondi, who took his place. Only other one that I'm very wary of is, I can't pronounce her last name, but the Surgeon General pick. She was all completely super pro COVID restrictions, pro mask mandates, lockdowns, all of that. She was pro COVID vaccine, all that stuff. So I'm just wondering why Trump picked someone like her. Granted, people can change and people do change, but her any kind of interview or any kind of time she has spoken since COVID gives me no indication that she has changed. So that's really, there's, even though, well, luckily, and the good thing about that is the Surgeon General has little to no power. All they
yeah,
can do is make suggestions and say, this is what I think you should do. This is what I believe is dangerous and you shouldn't do this. But like,
Yeah,
the fact that he would pick someone in his administration who was in favor of all the very authoritarian COVID restrictions, that worries me just a tiny bit.
I kind of have to wonder though if for smaller cabinet positions like the Surgeon General, if there is someone who would be more qualified for that, or if that's just one of the positions that is just like so entrenched in bureaucracy that you're going to get a bureaucrat no matter what.
My pick, I mean, for Surgeon General would be Ben Carson. I think he'd make a fantastic Surgeon General, but I don't know if that was something he wanted to do. I know he
Yeah,
was the Secretary of HUD during Trump's first term.
yeah, and I mean, I think that was a good spot for them. I do like. I am curious, especially you, Adam, like what you think of Tulsi Gabbard as like as DNI, since you're the resident military.
I love the DNI pick. I've been kind of a Tulsi fanboy ever since she started. Well, it's really not that she drifted right. A lot of her views still more closely align with the classic liberal, but it's the fact that her party went warp speed so far to the left that she is now basically by default she has become right. But I've been following her ever since that, and like I've watched the video and I noticed that Trump has a strategy with picking these people. You look at Tulsi Gabbard. One of the national security agencies, I believe, under Biden, put Tulsi Gabbard on a terror watch list because she warned about the dangers of a Kamala presidency. And then Trump makes her the head of that same agency that puts people on the watch list. Number one. Number two, Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth was targeted by the Department of Defense. He had orders to help provide security for the Biden inauguration. And at the last minute, his orders were canceled because of a quote unquote white supremacist tattoo he had on his chest, which was nothing more than it was a variation of the Jewish cross. So the Department of Defense targeted him, got his orders canceled, and then what does Trump do? Puts him in charge of the very agency that targeted him.
Yeah, which by the way, that I know which photo you're talking about because like left wing Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it is they've tried to circulate that photo of him again like ad nauseum, and it's just not going anywhere. So
okay. Yeah. And unfortunately, on that note, I gotta sign.
All right, well, Adam, it was great talking to you, and yeah, hopefully we'll talk again soon before the holidays. But if not, have a good Thanksgiving.
You guys as well. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
See you, Adam.
So, Gabe, you're still here. I am curious. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the cabinet? And also, I know that since you're, at least I think you're the Secretary of State guy. So, what do you think of Mark as?
I mean, I've always been a fan. I mean, I have always been a fan of Rubio, so I'm biased. I voted for Rubio in the 2016 primary.
Same.
I mean, I think what the Secretary of State does is mostly ceremonial, and I think Rubio fits that very well. I mean, taken as a whole, I don't necessarily have any deep-seated opposition to any of Trump's picks. I think taken as a whole, the best analogy I can think of was written by a guy I saw on Twitter a couple of days ago, where he said Trump's cabinet essentially resembles like a coalition government in Europe, where you have people from all sides of the political spectrum. They're guided by the fact that they want government to run or go a certain direction, but that doesn't mean that they're all ideologically aligned. And I think that's what his cabinet, Trump's cabinet, is starting to resemble. But it's also pretty clear that who Trump is putting in these positions are rewarding different constituencies. So like Rubio rewards the establishment, Hegseth and Tulsi reward the anti-war establishment, or not even anti-war. Like Tulsi has never said like if the US is attacked, we need to sit on our butts and do nothing. She has said things
Right.
like, well, why are we picking fights with Russia? Why are we sending billions and billions of dollars in missiles to Ukraine when really they're going nowhere? And it's just, we know how this is going to end. We just don't want it to end that way. So we're just prolonging it. Like,
Yeah.
that I mean, to me that's not necessarily anti-war, but again though, that's kind of rewarding that constituency that voted for Trump. And then even like RFK as HHS secretary, that's also rewarding all the RFK voters or the moderate to liberal voters that came over to him. So I think, I mean, I think it's what the GOP is eventually turning into, which is it's still going to be a socially conservative party, but it's going to be a socially conservative party on other issues, not necessarily gay marriage or abortion. It's going to be religious rights
Right.
and trans rights to the extent that they don't infringe on don't infringe on the majority's rights. And then I think they're going to be a quasi semi moderate party on labor rights and how they particularly interact with corporations. And
Yeah.
I remember I mean, I had this conversation with Adam a while ago, or I think it was the other day in chat, where we were talking about candidates and who we like on the cabinet or not, and I said, JD Vance, he's not the prototypical conservative Republican. Like after the big train derailment, in Palestine, Ohio, he was the first one who put out a bill that
Yeah.
proposed new regulations on that rail company. Like that's the thing. Like the Republican Party is not going to get in the way of business and basically be like, well, you have to do this. But they will get in the way of business and be like, but we're not going to let you monopolize this segment of the economy. For better or worse, the Democratic Party has, because it's a party of interest groups, and you have to give interest groups something to keep them in your tent. And so, that like ties into what we discussed about with the ACA, where to get insurance companies on board, you had to give them subsidies, which was basically narrow networks that they can control. So they have a captive market. Whereas, the GOP won't go that route or won't
Right.
do something like that because they have a different economic model that isn't laissez-faire libertarian, but it's also not this weird thing where we're proposing regulations on companies and we're doing it because we want to kowtow to our base, but in reality it's not doing anything. I think ultimately Trump's cabinet is a reflection of kind of where the GOP is going. And I think Trump's a little bit ahead of where the party is in general. But I think part of Trump picking Vance was Vance is the heir apparent to Trump, and he can
Yeah.
articulate Trump's vision of the Republican Party in a way that Trump can't.
I
So whereas Vance can come up with a bunch of arguments for things like this is why we regulate companies, this is why we don't regulate companies, he kind of encapsulates like that working class vision for the Republican Party.
Yeah, I would also say because like I honestly didn't even know like who Vance Rowe was until I got nominated as VP. But
Mm-hmm.
I looked him up and there was that whole big controversy too. I know a lot of people in the base were pretty nervous because he had at first been like critical of Trump, but as I pointed out, like I definitely was I was definitely critical of Trump back in
Yeah.
2016. We
Yeah.
all for anyone who kind of
We all
knows,
were at the time, yeah.
we all were, and that's kind of what led us to split from Red Millennial back in the day. I've told that story on the podcast multiple times too, but yeah. So I mean, like like I don't really penalize Vance for being skeptical of Trump Same thing. I know Josh's concern with Marco Rubio was kind of the same thing, but like pretty much after that Republican primary in 2016, Rubio's been loyal to Trump. I would actually say more so than DeSantis has been in Florida. I like DeSantis, but like I will say that one thing that DeSantis did, which really kind of lost some credibility, was he basically during his reelection campaign, for governor in Florida, he said that he was not going to run for president of the United States. There had been rumors, circulating, and he had said he actually did say, "I'm not going to run for president." And then as soon as he got elected, he did run and said some things about Trump that was not, so he kind of screwed himself over, which is unfortunate because I think he's been a decent governor, but a lot of people just aren't willing to look past that.
I mean, I think I will say for DeSantis, I think the Florida GOP owes a lot to DeSantis for actually shepherding the state into basically becoming a Republican stronghold. I think DeSantis has done a good job shepherding that. I mean, I can understand why DeSantis ran against Trump because it was the height of his popularity. But I also think he underestimated just how much, just how much the GOP elites still don't understand their base. And I think that this election highlighted it because the down ballot results were generally disappointing for the GOP. Like they didn't know how to talk to these voters. So the message that they spat out, somewhat worked because Trump was at the top of the ticket. So he brought out a lot of people and enough of them voted down ballot. But because your messaging wasn't effective to a lot of these people, they still like voted for their Democratic congressman, or they just left the ballot blank, or they voted third party for Congress. Like, so I think DeSantis's running was partly that he listened to these elites.
Yeah.
And because he listened to them, he didn't understand the base of the party.
Definitely. And I would 100% agree with you that like DeSantis is really good at policy and like actually doing a good job of governor. But when it comes to the politics part of the job, I think, and I would even say this the first time around, when he was running for governor, had it not been for Trump's endorsement the first time when he was running for Florida governor, he would have lost to Andrew. I can't even remember the guys.
I think Gillum or Gillum.
Yeah, Andrew Gillum. He would have lost to Andrew Gillum, and I remember because I was part of the college Republicans at the time, and I was working on that campaign, on their behalf. It was really a tough thing. And then when Trump's endorsement came through, and it was super light in the race too, we all kind of like breathed a sigh of relief, like, thank goodness we're probably going to win this thing now actually. But
yeah, well, I mean, I will say I don't know how much of an impact Trump's endorsement had on DeSantis. I certainly don't think it hurt him. So,
no.
At worst, it was a net zero. I think it did help him.
Yeah.
But I also think what ultimately helped DeSantis the most was the underlying trends that were already starting in Florida. Like the Cuban American and Puerto Rican population was already becoming more conservative. I think COVID accelerated that, and then all the transplants from the north moving in made it even more conservative. But a lot of these underlying trends that kind of came through this election cycle, if you look for those patterns over the last couple elections, like you'll find them. Like in a year where Trump lost the popular vote by 4.5 points in 2020, he won Florida by over 3 points. So by then,
Yeah.
by 2020, Florida was already 7 points to the right of the nation, and that had never been seen in 20 years.
And that was also with Democrat operatives
Yep.
basically tweeting openly that they were moving to Florida
Yep.
just to build a blue wave. And
hmm
you
Well,
know,
and if you even look at the polling of Florida, or well, even the polling in Texas, like those are the two
yeah,
big comparisons, all the polling was off. Like it underestimated Republicans by a lot. So like even pollsters don't know how to talk to these voters. And maybe it's because these voters don't want to talk to pollsters, maybe they just don't care.
well,
But
that's the whole thing, is most conservatives don't talk to pollsters at all. That was the whole thing in 2016 too, was if we had gone by the polls, Hillary Clinton would have won, like by a landslide, and yet she didn't, and that caused, a whole big upset that is still going on
yeah,
today.
well, I mean, it's if you go by the polls, Democrats are going to win every time because, and that's only going to get worse before it
Yeah,
gets better because the people look. I look at it this way: my day job is I'm online for all my hours of work because I have
yeah,
to.
same here.
I work in databases. I work in grants. So, it's in online, all these online portals. So I am the type of conservative that would actually be available to answer an online sample. I am not like I'm an outlier for conservatives in terms of my job is mostly online. It's white
Right.
collar. It like requires a college degree. The majority of the GOP coalition now is not it does not fit those specific demographics. And
Right.
so they're less likely to respond to an online sample. They're already suspicious of like random cell phone numbers, so they're not unlikely to respond to cell phone calls. So that's why within like a week of Kamala running, she was ahead by 10 points because the only people they were picking up were like rich white liberals or people whose job had them online 20, and I think that's only going to get worse because I think the realignment that we're seeing, the wealthier are going to become more democratic, which is going to make the Democratic Party even less working class. But the
Yeah.
GOP is going to become more working class, and the base of their party, even more, is going to become the people who make things, who
I
work in factories, who are not online 24/7.
I think also the celebrity endorsement thing really fell flat on on the face too. I mean, to the point now too, where like Kamala had like close to $1 billion war chest that she had amounted, which is pretty impressive. And
Mm-hmm.
yet she's like 22 million
Mm-hmm.
in
Yep.
debt, and Trump even said, and some people think that this is a troll, but I don't think it is. He even said like, "Hey, look, I'm willing to, for the sake of national unity,
Yep. Yeah, I
I'm."
will pay off her debt. Yep.
Yeah, which I think the subtext is, okay, well, after I pay off this debt, you go fuck off, and
Yeah, right. You
you know,
go way into a dark hole and never come back. Yeah, and
wait, wait,
there are articles that say like rich donors are reaching out and like they're pissed off about the fact that $1 billion was spent and you lost. But where did you think as a donor, where did you think your money was going? Like their campaign made no doubts that they had endless amounts of cash because it kind of fit the Vibes campaign or Vibes
yeah,
narrative. So like they couldn't wait to be like, we raised $300 million after the debate, or $50 million after this or that. Like if you're a donor, where did you think that money was going though? When they also posted like, oh, we have $100 million left. out of raising $1 billion like a week before the campaign ends.
It's also very interesting though, because like I'm a technical writer and a technical communications expert. And a lot of people in my industry, not all of us, but like a lot of people are also, we do lots of freelance work for like venture capital type people.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that's like been pretty fascinating is I listen to a lot of venture capital like podcasts. And the one thing that a lot of them have said is like even like a lot of these venture capitalists who are on the left in California are now starting, a lot of them, David Sachs most notably, I mean, he's always been conservative to begin with, but he and like a lot of other people have actually started to support conservatives. Why? Because the DEI has really messed with the tech industry, especially post COVID, to where, you know, you're trying to launch a product, you're trying to launch software, and yet your coding team doesn't want to come in, or, you know, even if you allow them to work from home, they're not doing the coding, you know, stuff that they need to get done because of,
well, they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, they don't know what. Yeah,
they weren't hired for their skills.
Yeah, they don't know what they're doing, and even some of the people who do know what they're doing, they're more interested in, you know, doing activism during work hours than they are complete. So a lot of people, I think, were forced to kind of realize, okay, well, if you're not Apple or Microsoft,
mm-hmm.
and even then, like a lot of those companies, like you can't afford in the tech industry to really, you know, DEI is costing these startups.
Yeah. I mean, I think ironically, DEI has kind of made it cool to be a conservative again because now in all these formerly blue places, you can show off like your Trump colors, or you can show off your conservative colors, because you know what, those places aren't as blue as they used to be.
I wouldn't go so far as to say maybe you can show off your colors like in the streets, but there's definitely like there has definitely been some conversation of, hey, maybe this stuff isn't, you know, turning out the way we thought it would, and it's causing our shareholders to lose money. And well, and the other thing too is, you know, I think the whole thing with Vance, and this is also the same thing with Ramaswamy, is because the thing with Vance is he definitely has that you know, blue collar upbringing, but yet he was also in high tech, so he's navigated between both worlds, so he can appeal to both the blue collar man and the white collar businessman as well. And the other thing I like about Vance, the more I've gotten to know of him, is I think the thing that we can all kind of agree with is that Trump's manner of speaking, you know, we all know that Trump sticks his foot in his mouth more than once. And both with Vivek and Vance are really good at articulating the message in a way that's not going to be so abrasive.
Mm-hmm.
I think Trump
I think Vivek, I will say, I don't know how I feel about him, because Vivek kind of gives me like the negative venture capitalist libertarian vibe. And
sure.
I don't know if he really does believe that or not. I mean, I didn't pay a ton of attention to him in the primary, but I mean, I don't have anything against him, but I do wonder if he's going to get anywhere in where I think the Republican Party is going. I think he's going to have to become more like Vance if he already isn't, because Vance already has all the cred that he needs. Like, he speaks the language, his background, actually, like you just said, it fits both. It actually or lives in both worlds. Like
Yeah.
Vance has been in money circles, but he also grew up poor. He's married to an Asian woman, so he's in a biracial relationship. So you can't really demagogue him to death over that. I think Vance fits the mold more than Vivek, but I mean Vivek certainly can overcome that over time.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
I think honestly, I think that's why Trump stuck him in the Department of Government Efficiency, or the Doge,
yeah,
as
yeah, yeah.
I think that was Trump's way of kind of saying, okay, Vivek, you and Elon really wanted to do this.
Yeah, going down.
I'm giving it to you. You've got 18 months to to do this thing. Have at it. If you guys can actually do this thing, then you'll have a future. If not, well, we'll have to revisit, and see where you guys are at. So I that's I think that's smart. And
Yeah.
the other thing too with Vivek is, and I think this is kind of like the you mentioned that the Republican Party is becoming broader.
Hmm.
I was on another friend's podcast a few weeks ago, and I said that basically the Republican Party now is more or less where the Libertarian Party was in 2012, when Ron Paul was kind of, at the head. You had a lot of populist, conservative libertarian types. They didn't, who weren't really concerned with social issues, but again, it was the economy. It was getting, the debt under control. Now the Libertarian Party has gone completely off the rails. I think that's because a lot of people who were libertarian, thanks to Trump, are kind of coming back to the Republican Party, so to
Yeah,
speak.
I mean it's kind of ironic like with the Libertarian Party, which is if you're a true libertarian, you don't believe in suppose like it's to some libertarians to be a true libertarian, you don't believe in any government at all.
Right.
Some people say they're libertarians because they're pro-choice. Some people say they're libertarian just because they're small government types. I mean, like it runs the gambit. Like it's an anti. So I kind of look at like the Libertarian Party as I do like the Constitution Party, the Green Party, the Workers Party. Like it's more it's more a reflection of being anti the two party system than it really is that you really understand what the Libertarian Party is. Because if
Yeah.
you if you look at like the wild swings that the Libertarian Party has gone through with who they've selected for president, like they went from 2012, I think, with Ron Paul to 2016 with, I'm blanking the gentleman's name, but the former governor of New Mexico. I can't remember who they ran in 2020. And then they
Yeah,
ran
Joe Jorgensen.
yeah, and then they ran Chase Oliver this time, and like Chase Oliver basically was a hardcore liberal. Like the Libertarian Party doesn't even know what they stand for. So if you're voting for the Libertarian Party, you're basically just voting against the two party system, which is
Yeah.
fine. But it really makes it hard to define like what a libertarian is.
But that's what I'm saying too, Gabe. Is that the Libertarian Party that I would have been like associated with like in 2012, in 2013, has
Mhm.
now essentially morphed into MAGA in 2016, and then really um again became like even more populist in
Yeah.
2024.
Yeah, that's fair. I think a lot of voters have gravitated to the Republican Party, and I think the fringes are what's left in the Libertarian Party.
Yeah. And I mean, granted, there are fringes on the right and the left too, but
Mm.
I think at least for the right, those fringes are a lot. They get like a lot less, acknowledgement from our side.
Yeah. I agree because I think the mainstream of the Republican Party is where the majority of their voters and actually the majority of their our elected officials are. And I think the fringe of the Democratic Party is actually in control of their party. Now,
Yeah.
I'm biased, obviously,
No,
but when 5 or 10% of the Democratic Party, which is their ultra wealthy base, is the ones driving things like DEI, and then it becomes the mainstream of their party, then that is the fringe.
well, it's very telling when you have basically left wing Twitter saying that Bill Maher is basically like Rush Limbaugh now. Basically, Bill Maher is too far right for a lot
Right.
of
Yeah.
left wingers. I don't know if you saw, but I retweeted it, and I'll have to send this in the group chat. But Bill Maher basically did like a pretty scathing monologue
Mhm.
last week, basically saying, "Look, we can complain about Trump all we want, but the reality is woke politics and victim culture are what lost us the election. It wasn't sexism, it wasn't racism or bigotry.
Yeah.
It was the focusing on all these niche topics. And until the Democrats really realize it, I think the Democrats ironically are in a worse spot than the Republicans were after 2 terms of the Bush era, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, the Republicans after when when Obama got into office first, I mean, they were still pretty unified, but they also were still a semi cohesive, ideological, political, racial, demographic coalition.
Yeah.
Whereas now the Democratic Party is less so. Like, actually, ironically, the Democratic Party is becoming whiter,
Yeah.
and less racially diverse as opposed
Yeah.
to the GOP. But I think the Democratic Party's issues go back to, so for a long time in political circles, there's been a terminology of that the Democratic Party is basically this upstairs downstairs coalition where you have poor minorities voting for Democrats and then wealthy white Democrats voting for Democrats. And so those two coalitions don't always blend together well. But if you could paint the Republicans as a bunch of corporatists, plutocrats who believe in like libertarian policies that we're just going to give endless amounts of money and power to corporations, you could kind of keep these two groups together, because you paint your opponent as worse. Now they can't really do that. And what's worse for Democrats is that the focus of power within the party has really shifted to that 10 or 15% who are uber wealthy. And
Yeah.
the infrastructure of the party over time has gravitated to that 10 or 15%. So whereas in 2026, which is a midterm, where, I can see Republicans getting browbeaten a little bit because it's a midterm and that's
Right.
historically how it works. I don't think 2026 is going to say anything about 2028 if the party hasn't actually made any significant changes. Like if you do the Kamala Harris playbook in 2028 and just assume that like, well, people are gonna after 4 years be tired of Trump and it's gonna translate to Vance. I don't know if that's true or not because people are gonna have the same reaction to you running with Taylor Swift all over again and being a California elite liberal that they had in 2024. Like that
Yeah.
mindset is not going to change for a voter over 4 years. So, to Bill Maher's credit, and I like Bill Maher, I listen to him a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, I do too.
I give him a lot of credit because I think he is a classical progressive in the sense that he's not like Bernie Sanders economically liberal, but he's more a practical liberal who's like, I want incremental change that is economically progressive, that benefits people's lives, and I want to ditch all this other shit that kind of just is being thrown onto us by woke institutions and the rich liberal elite. And I
Yeah,
think the party's going to have to do it if they want to win again.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I've been podcasting for a long time, and years before I met any of you guys, I actually used to have a segment on my show where I would criticize Bill Maher, for all of the things that he was saying out conservatives, because I think a lot of it was unfair towards the Tea Party movement. I don't think he understood what the hell thing. So I've been critical of Bill Maher a lot, but within the last few years, I really have given him credit
Mhm.
on the show where I'm like, at least he is willing to to talk to conservatives.
Mhm.
He's also not as smarmy or condescending with conservatives as he used to be, because I think he's starting to realize that perhaps we're not as nuts as he thought we were, and also maybe that there are more nuts people on his side than there
Yeah.
were
I mean, I
initially.
don't I don't think he has like TDS, and to be fair, he has called out the issues with his
Yeah,
party well before the election result. And I think if you honestly had a conversation with him, and he has guests on and he has some of
yeah,
these conversations, like there are areas that he agrees with his guests on things like economic policy that the host of The View would definitely not agree on. He's one of the more practical ones. But if the Democratic Party is going to get back to, I don't know, let's say like 2020 Biden, like that, that's where the party needs to get to by 2028. They would be very wise to listen to the Bill Mauers of the world versus a lot of other voices that are also competing for the same amount of power, as the
yeah,
party is kind of like trying to figure out where they're going to go. I mean, like I said, midterms are generally anti-incumbent elections, so I think they can hang their hat on that. But you know what? After 2026, when the 2028 campaign gets into full swing, like you got to have something. Like you can't just go back to the 2024 playbook because you're going to lose again.
so a couple of things on that. I think you're right. About the midterms being anti-incumbent, and I think that's why Trump is so gung ho on. Okay, folks, let's move. We've got 18, 20 months to do what we need to do now. Full steam ahead, no messing around. And
Yeah.
I think he's very smart to do that. I don't think he necessarily understood that the first time around, or if he did, he didn't necessarily have a good cabinet to really support him in making his goals known in the first 18 months. To your
Yeah.
sec
Go ahead. Sorry.
to It's interesting what you're saying about the Democrats going back to maybe the party of Joe Biden or even the Hillary Clinton, because honestly, I if Tulsi Gabbard or someone like that had stayed within the Democrats, I would have said maybe. But the reality is, I mean, maybe if John Fetterman sticks around in the Democrats, maybe that could be the case. But honestly, AOC is kind of the new face of the left, and she's really far out there. So
Yeah. But
I'm not.
to her credit, even AOC has had conversations with like
Yeah.
AOC Trump voters.
Well, yeah. Well, that was the other thing too that we actually talked about on the live stream last week, is that AOC actually she did that Instagram live stream, and she actually was receptive. So
Hmm.
like I said, you might be right, but My point is it does seem like the Democrats are a lot more stuck in going further to the left, whereas we're more expanding, to like an
Yeah.
open tent that isn't so focused on radical policies.
Well, I mean that so, like you can as a party, you can create a perception that you're not what you are.
Right.
So, and I think Democrats did that successfully in 2020 with Joe Biden. But I also do think that Joe Biden didn't believe to the same extent the things that his party did. Like Joe Biden didn't give two iotas about abortion, or to the extent that like he wasn't going to get rid of the Hyde Amendment and like or support abolishing the filibuster to pass like Roe at the national level with 50 votes. Like he didn't care enough about that. I think and so Democrats successfully kind of made this perception of the party like Joe Biden is this image of stability. It's what the party is. We're not as radical as Trump is saying we are. I don't think they can get back to that. Not only because obviously Joe Biden is not around and the Tulsi Gabbards are not around, as you said, but also because that's not where the intellectual weight of the party is anymore.
Yeah. Well,
And I think by 2028, a lot of like these minority congressmen in southern Texas in these congressional districts that have held those districts because they are Hispanic and they are conservative and they've been around a while, I think they're going to be gone by 2028. And so you don't even have the voices in Congress being like, you need to listen to these people. Like, stop doing this DEI crap, like we told you. And
yeah.
so that also then makes it harder for the weight of voices in the party and the policies that you craft to move back to the center versus, as you say, just being inevitably dragged further and further to the left.
I mean, it's interesting that you're saying this stuff about Biden, but like, I think it's become very clear to everyone almost that Biden, from the beginning of his presidency, almost in retrospect, was in cognitive
Yeah,
decline. And
yeah,
so really you have to wonder, like, was it even Biden's party, or was it just kind of the machine of government bureaucracy running things? And I think we know.
I mean, I think it was I mean, my personal opinion is I think it was a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, because so I will say, I think on the policies that came out, like the infrastructure act, like between him and McConnell, I think that was him. The like $1.9 trillion omnibus, I can't remember what the name of it or the acronym was. I think that was the infrastructure and bureaucracy of the party because, as we've talked about before, that was just rewarding different interest groups within the party with loads of cash. And then to make it politically feasible, they gave us all checks and were like, "You should be happy that you got this." But even then, I don't think that was so much Biden. What I know of Biden is that he kind of saw himself as like the next FDR, and FDR
Right.
didn't give two shits about abortion. He didn't care about gay marriage. FDR didn't even really care about racial issues back in the day. And
Right.
I do think to Biden's credit that he kind of saw himself that way as kind of like a moderate on these issues. But the problem is the party kept trying to drag him to the left. So, I think Biden inevitably just didn't move, but you could definitely tell that there was a difference in how Kamala would approach and talk about abortion or the
Yeah.
party apparatus would versus Joe Biden.
Well, I think there was that. I think there was the fact that, like, I think Biden had the FDR thing. I definitely do think, like, Biden's whole entire strategy, as we all discussed back in 2020, was Orange Man bad. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
I, I think that pretty much was his campaign. And at the time, because of COVID and because Trump was the incumbent,
Yeah.
when COVID broke out, like or not, I think that did help
Mhm.
Biden. I think had it been a normal year and had Biden had to, compete with Trump on like a more even, platform, I think it still would have been interesting, but I'm not sure if it would have been, as I think Biden's flaws would have shown a lot more than they.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would probably say that Trump would have actually won again, but Biden probably still would have won the popular vote. Um, and I think that those realignment trends that we saw in force a couple weeks ago would have also shown through actually more forcefully in 2020. Like this election has been building for 8 years, like
Yeah,
ever since Trump won in the first place. Because the coalition that got Trump elected this time is very different than the coalition that got him elected 8 years ago. And I know there's similarities between the two, but Trump didn't win in 2016 with, what Adam said, 65% of the Native American vote, 30% of the black vote, 45% of the Hispanic vote, 50% of the Asian vote. Like, he didn't win with that coalition. He won with some of those same voters, but he didn't win with that scope of a coalition
right.
like he did this time. And I do think, like, I think Trump had to lose in 2020 to win this go round and win in such the dominating way that he did. And I think Trump winning by such the extent that he did is why we're seeing such like liberal cope on Twitter and all these Democratic intellectuals being like, we don't know what to do right now. Like, our entire
Yeah,
theory of politics has been blowing up in the last 2 weeks.
yeah. Well, I think you know, one of the things that I had said is like again, I don't. I think that if I mean, I think that Trump. I do think that Trump technically won the 2020 election. Like I said, I think there was
Yeah,
you
funny
know
business.
major funny business, but I also think, and this was our big flaw in 2020. I think a lot of us thought that Biden was such an inept,
Mm-hmm.
like we all saw Biden's flaws from the beginning, so we were like, well, how could anyone? So I think that a lot of conservatives and a lot of Trump people were so overly confident that Trump would win in 2020 that they didn't show up in force like they did
Right.
in 2016. And so like I I know for me this last election I've done mail-in ballots for I did mail-in ballots for 2016 and 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Both of 2016 was the first election I ever voted in, and then 2020 I also did mail-in ballots.
Mm-hmm.
But this was the first election where I actually went in person and voted because I was like on election day because I was like, you know what, like I want to make sure that my vote counts. I don't want to do any
Mm-hmm.
of it. I don't want to do any of this election, early voting or mail-in ballot stuff. And I think there were a lot
Yeah.
of people in the same boat as I was. So
Yeah, I mean, Trump drew out a bunch of voters that actually didn't even vote in 2016 or 2020. Like,
yeah,
he still has the ability to do that. And to be fair, like, his campaign was run very differently this go round than it was run in 2016 and 2020. In 2016, it was kind of this spastic, like, if we win, we win. In 2020, it was run more like a traditional Republican campaign. And this go round, they actually embraced the candidate that they had, and they decided early on, like, these are the types of voters we're going to target, and these are the venues in which we're going to target them in, like Joe
yeah,
Rogan. I mean that pays off, but it doesn't fit the typical mold of a campaign. I can't tell you how many articles I read that were like, well, Trump doesn't have a campaign infrastructure in Pennsylvania and he's outsourcing everything to Elon Musk. And meanwhile, Kamala's got like 50 field offices in Philly and $50 million. It's like, great, but we saw how that worked out.
well, I will say this, and I mean, I almost hate to say that this was a positive because it should have never it should have never happened in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think that the assassination attempt, it wasn't that the assassination attempt itself worked in Trump's favor,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the fact that I think what really helped Trump and what Max and I had both predicted was if he goes back to Pennsylvania
Mm-hmm.
and goes back to Butler and really makes a statement by going back there, that will really help him in the polls, if not give him the presidency. And I think it did. Because I know that like I know from talking to people who were in the Secret Service formerly, they were like, yeah, we would never advise a presidential candidate to go back there, but I think it really showed like guts and also dedication, and really helped him to get Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely helped him. But I generally, I mean, there's the people who follow the day to day of a campaign, and they're
Yeah,
like, this event has shifted the race, or this event has shifted the race. Like nothing really shifted the race. And there's now this liberal cope on Twitter, although it's not verified, so I think it's a bunch of bullshit. But like supposedly some Obama bros who run like this, I think it's a Save America podcast. They supposedly leaked the Biden internals that made him drop out back in July. And it was like, he was losing 400 electoral votes. The Republicans had a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, like 300 House seats. And it's like, that probably isn't true, or it's the worst case scenario. But Biden dropping out and Harris jumping in, I don't think changed the trajectory of the race one way or the other. I think Biden would have still lost by 2 or 3 because
yeah,
I think a lot of people were parking their votes with JFK, or RFK, excuse me, which is why he was polling at like 10 or 20% or back
yeah.
then. And then when Harris jumped in, all the liberals for RFK were like, okay, we finally don't have to decide at the last minute. We can say that we're supporting Harris because we want to support her. But that would have happened either way. Like the assumption that like 20% of the Democratic Party would sit out the election simply because they're like, well, Joe Biden is old and senile. That's not
Yeah.
that's never happened in modern history. So
Well,
I think I think I think fundamentally the race actually was pretty consistent from start to finish. It's just that the political analysts who make their money on talking about everything in elections, and pollsters who don't know how to model their samples, like their bread and butter, how they make money is like, this shifted the race. No, this shifted the race. Like the race shifted again.
well
As
that
opposed to like, yeah, we knew how this was going to end since July.
well that's kind of like, so you do follow campaigns day to day more so than I think anyone. So that's kind of why I wanted to have you on, because I wanted to ask, you were have the conversation, and you've already kind of explained a little bit, but like, what do you think the day-to-day strategy that worked for Trump versus the day-to-day strategy that worked for the for the Biden slash later Harris campaign was,
Well,
essentially?
I mean, I think that I think the Biden campaign strategy was to minimize how much Biden was out there. And then of course after his debate performance, like they were just in damage control mode. And even after the first assassination attempt against Trump, that was just a reprieve. Like they were back to like doing damage control. But the thing is, a lot of Biden's campaign team actually migrated over to Harris's team. And there's some
Right,
internal
right.
stuff that we've only heard through leaks, but they obviously had no faith in Harris. So like they were running the bunker strategy again until they figured out like, oh, this bunker strategy is not going to work like 2020. So then they had her go out and do a bunch of these interviews, and she had no experience with it, or she was just very bad with it. And I think her campaign team did her a disservice. Like they tried to make her be something that she wasn't, and it showed through. Whereas with Trump, I think Trump's team embraced him early on about who he was. They knew that he would say stupid shit. They knew that, he would ramble on for hours on end, and the media would be like, this guy's not a serious candidate for president because they'd seen this 2 times before. But I think Trump actually surrounded himself with people who actually understood who Trump could appeal to and what he was good at, and distilled that into a message along with the economy is crappy, DEI is just destroying our institutions, our businesses. And I think Trump's team did a good job actually managing what makes Trump Trump and distilling it into something that actually was relatable to the average person. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. I mean, they also took advantage of just the circumstances and the context of what you and I and Adam were talking about before the show, which was just how out of touch the left is.
I Yeah.
Things costing a heck of a lot more than they used to.
Well, the other thing with minorities too that I forgot to mention this earlier, and this is going to be like super politically incorrect what I'm about to say, but it's true, is honestly with minorities, I think that all these frivolous lawsuits and prosecutions against Trump that were politically motivated really helped Trump to the point where like there were a lot of black people on Twitter who were like, damn, Trump's like a legitimate N-word because he now has
He's
Trump's a
gone
legitimate
through the justice system.
yeah Trump's got hood.
Yeah.
I think like I mean I almost like have to. I don't know if it would have changed the election this much, but I honestly do think that like there were a lot of people who were kind of like Trump's just bellyaking about there being wrongdoing with the 2020 election. If I were the Democrats, if I were Joe Biden, I would have called Alvin Bragg and all these other liberal DAs and been like, what the hell are you doing? You guys can't do this right now. You're pretty much proving his point. Wait until after he drops out of the Republican primaries or loses the election, and then go after him.
And then do your stuff. Well, I think them going after Trump so much for the last 8 years, I think it normalized them.
Yeah.
Whatever attack they leveled against Trump, because you've seen it for, even as an average person, even if you don't love Trump, you've seen it for 8 years. So your knee-jerk reaction is going to be like, oh, look, if they don't like Trump, so they're just saying that they don't like him and they're making something else up. Versus if it's like, if you're legitimately targeting him once or twice on something, it's very different than if you just, like, it's consistently been 8 years of, Russiagate and trying to influence a foreign election and 2 impeachments and Trump's a fascist and a dictator. Like, the average person at some point is going to tune that out. And I think they played it too much.
Well, and also like the absurd amount of charges that he got too. Like he got like 54 convictions, and a lot of them were things that were like a slap on the wrist, offenses.
That no DA would have ever taken into a court of law. Like 34 counts. And no DA would have taken them into a court of law because the DA would have been like, this is not worth it. I'm just going to go with 1 or 2 biggies.
Even left, I remember because I'm not super into lawfare, but I do follow a few like liberal like law professors, and they were all saying, look, this is really bad. Like even RFK, when he was facing off against Trump, he said, I'm not a fan of Trump at all. With that being said, this is really bad legal. You know,
it's the so the in its own way, the left is its own worst enemy because
yeah,
they open up the door to reprisal for the things that they first did. So like, and this
yeah,
goes all the way back to 2013 during like with when Republicans controlled the House, but there was a blockade in the Senate. Like they eliminated the filibuster for judicial nominees. Well, lo
yeah,
and behold, in 2017, when Trump wanted to appoint some new Supreme Court justices, the Democrats were like, we're not releasing our filibuster on the Supreme Court. So what did Republicans do? They eliminated the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees. And then Democrats threatened to get rid of the filibuster, or Democrats impeached Trump twice, or Republicans wanted to impeach Biden. Democrats threatened to get rid of the filibuster, but didn't because, ironically, Manchin and Sinema saved their asses, who who are both independents right now. They left the
yeah.
party they were loved so much, but they saved their party. And I mean, if Democrats had repealed the filibuster for like just anything in the Senate, Republicans could just do their entire agenda without Democratic support. And so I think Democrats haven't really learned the lesson that they are their own worst enemies, and that at the time, the things that they think sound good for short term gain, what comes around goes around. And
Yeah.
the theory that like America is going to become permanently blue, that's been pretty dashed by now.
Well, the other thing too is, and this is specifically with Israel Palestine. I think they realize that like demographically, they
Mm-hmm.
really they really kind of fuck themselves over too, if you'll pardon the language, because
Mm-hmm.
like they called Trump a Nazi and said that he was like really anti-Semitic, right? That was a big thing in 2016 and 2020, and like bring up Richard Spencer and Nick Fuentes and all these really
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
really niche like
Yep.
figures. But then but then they were really in a conundrum because the anti-Palestine left showed up in 2024 and
Mm-hmm.
were basically accusing the the Jews of genocide, and
Yep.
and so no matter what side of the argument you're on of that debate, the Democrats were in a conundrum because on the one hand, if you condemn Israel for anything, you're an
Mm-hmm.
anti-Semite, and
Yep.
yet if you condemn Palestine, you're also for genocide according to the left. So
Yeah.
Biden,
And I mean, it definitely bit him in Michigan
yeah,
with the Arab community. But that's, I mean, that's what you get when you're a party of interest groups. Like there's no broad
yeah.
ideological agreement. So you're appealing to these groups of voters on one single issue. And what happens when you break on that issue? You lose that set of voters because
Well,
there's nothing else tying them to your party.
and I can't remember who it was, but someone said that there was some Democrat analyst who said that, I think it might have been Paul Krugman, who said that Kamala should have picked Josh Shapiro as
Yeah.
her running mate. But then someone else said, well, Shapiro can't run because optically it looks bad with him being,
What
so
you? Yeah.
so not just a Jew, but so like but like such a pro Zionist. So really like
Yeah.
she was kind of forced. I mean, it's hilarious in hindsight, but she was kind of forced to pick Tim Walz because, as awful as he was, he was like the least. He was, I guess, the safest pick for.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was safe, but I also think that I think Harris favors the Palestinians more than the Israelis, and so I think it was
Right.
easier also for her to pick Waltz, who may or may not have had a firm opinion on the issue, but it definitely wasn't Shapiro.
Well, right.
So
And you're right that she favors Palestine, but also she couldn't come out and say that directly. I mean, you notice that where the one thing I will give Biden credit for is even during that debate with him and Trump, he came out firmly in favor of Palestine. In fact, in favor of Israel. I mean, that
yeah,
was that was the one area of the debate where he actually was like coherent.
yeah,
Whereas like Kamala sidestepped that question
like she
quite
did a lot of questions.
quite she side that she sidestepped that step that one quite deliberately though. It wasn't like she didn't have
Mhm.
an answer. That one I felt
Right,
like
right.
she did have an answer. She just didn't want to say it because she knew it was politically, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. I mean, it's the Israel Palestine issue is one that is like the microcosm of the Democratic Party's issues being just an interest group party. And if you break on an issue, like I said, you lose that group of people. So like I the main benefactor, ironically, of Kamala Harris or like these voters leaving the Democratic Party was actually Jill Stein. It wasn't actually even Trump. Like Jill Stein got 45% of the vote in I can't remember the name of it, but the like 90% Arab community in Michigan. Like
Yeah.
she won those precincts. Um, but those voters now don't really have anything that ties them to the Democratic Party because the voices in the Democratic Party are not the ones going full throated like, yeah, we love Palestine or yeah, we love Israel. It's still a discombobulated mess now because there is no clear there's no policy directive from the party about where they stand. You just have a bunch of different candidates with varying levels of power saying different things. So to the average voter, they're like, nothing has changed. Like the party is still the same as it was in 24, and I didn't like it then, so why would I like it now?
It'll be very interesting to see what happens once Trump takes office
Mm-hmm.
with that whole thing because I don't think that Trump will start a war over Israel or Palestine as some people fear. I still think he is kind of the anti-war candidate,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. But I definitely do think that he's going to tell the Palestinians like, hey, you have to give our hostages back, or else there will be consequences. And just like in the '80s with Reagan, I think the Democrats, if they're smart, some of them are going to have to like sign off and be bipartisan,
Yeah.
on that, or
Well,
else.
I think there are some Democrats who see reason, and I think they will work with
Yeah,
Trump. If Trump actually, if he has a coherent vision about what he wants to accomplish and it's reasonable, I think he can get some Democrats on board.
yeah, but
I mean, I think for Trump's foreign policy in general, it's going to be that we will support our allies, but we will support our allies if they actually do the lifting. Like if I think the conversation between him and Bibi as an example is going to basically be Trump comes into office and he tells Netanyahu, you have 2 or 3 months to wrap up your shit. Get it done. Like, we'll cover for you for this amount of time. You do what you need to do, and then you get out and we're done. And then we'll work on peace. And
yeah,
I kind of think that's how Trump is going to operate because Israel is doing the heavy lifting. Like we're not launching rockets, we're not sending troops in. And I think that's why he's been so hard on Ukraine too, because the end result
Yeah.
of stalemate between Russia and Ukraine is eventually we would have to get directly involved. Like we
Well,
can only give Ukraine so many missiles before they need our stealth bombers, as an
well,
example.
and depending on who you talk to, Gabe. I mean, I have friends in the special forces community, and they've already told me. I mean, it's kind of an open secret at this point that
Oh, that they're there.
yeah,
Yeah.
we already have black ops guy.
Mhm.
Like the military isn't. We don't have boots on the ground as a fighting force, but we do.
Right.
But we do
Yeah.
have.
Boots on the ground.
But we do have, like, we basically have secret. I mean, it's basically the Cold War again. We have
Yeah,
secret
yeah,
agents.
it's basically Vietnam all over again, where we started with special forces, and then we put ground troops in there as trainers, and then we then put
Yeah,
more troops in, and finally we're like, okay, let's get involved, and then it just metastasized.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I think what from what I'm hearing from what it was pretty clear is I guarantee you Trump is already saying, hey, look, Ukraine, we've given you our most elite, like, special forces. Your strategy clearly isn't working, so either you need to go back to the table with Putin. And look, I'm not saying that Putin is the greatest guy
right.
ever. I'm not a Russian apologist, but I do think at the very least I think both sides do need to come to an agreement on some things because
Well, I mean, I think the ultimate conclusion of the Russia Ukrainian war, whatever you want to call it, is that Russia is going to get to keep some or most of the territory it's taken from Ukraine, which gives Putin a victory in his country. Maybe their economy can start to stabilize as the sanctions come off. But I also think in terms of Trump getting Ukraine on board and making clear to Russia that they don't do any more funny business, is Trump can basically say, this war is over. Ukraine has our full backing as a country now. If you cross this line, we're going to give them a shit ton more missiles, and it's not going to be a good day for you. And don't attack any
right.
other country in NATO because it's the exact same thing. And I think Trump will. I think Trump will be the beneficiary of the fact that Russia has basically depleted itself
Yeah.
against Ukraine. So I don't think Russia's going to be even in any position to break to kind of cross
And despite what the left says, Trump is actually not like a shill for Putin. Putin actually does not like Putin actually I don't think necessarily likes Trump even, but Trump is the only one who admits that Vladimir Putin is actually a smart leader.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think Putin is. I think he's an asshole, but I do think he's
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah, and
But I think for all Putin's intelligence, I think he made a mistake going into Ukraine because I think Putin assumed that the Western world would back down, and it didn't. But I think the Western, I mean, my 2 cents on that, or maybe it's 2020 hindsight, is the Western world should have decided early on whether we were going to send in troops or not, as opposed to this stalemate. And now it's just a stalemate and it's a meat grinder. And nobody's willing to stay faith. Nobody's willing to, because everybody loses in that situation, or everybody has to give up something.
yeah. Well, and I mean, I also think I haven't looked into this too much, but Putin is also, there are rumors that he's sick, and so
Yeah.
possibly like, who knows? There could be a coup or something. Other like KGB mafia types, coming in and taking over.
Well, and their economy is starting to go into the dumps again because oil prices are coming
Right,
down.
right.
Basically a petro state, and so when gas was $4 or $5 a gallon here, it really helped Russia because Russia could move it through back channels through China and then ship it to the worldwide market, and they would make tons of dough. Now with gas like at $3 a gallon, it's a microcosm of the fact that the world economy has shifted and oil and gas are cheap again, and that's really hurt them at a time when they're still spending loads of dough to fight this endless war in Ukraine. So I mean,
Yeah.
I think Russia can use it to save face in terms of like, we won this part of territory, like Ukraine is now back with us, and they can start to repair their economy.
Yeah, I mean, they have no other option. Honestly though, I am impressed that like Ukraine lasted for as long as they did. I do think that at least the West media really did underestimate like just how good the Russian fighting force is.
Yeah, they've gotten. I mean, they've gotten better over time. I think the Russians underestimated Ukraine at the
Right,
beginning,
right.
and then they got better. And then like the fact that Russia is a much bigger country than Ukraine and has a much larger military. Like I think that played a part. But it's kind of like that. It's kind of that. It's in military circles. It's logistics wins wars, and
Right.
so ironically, like the more territory you take, like the further you get from your own borders, it actually becomes harder because your opponent usually gets condensed. So like their supply lines get smaller, they have to defend less territory, and your logistics line actually gets longer. So ironically, Russia taking so much territory has actually helped Ukraine because it's got less territory to defend. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, the goal is to take as much territory as you can, but that doesn't change basic military 101.
Right. So, well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I especially want to see what happens within Trump's first 100 days. That's always very interesting to look at. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know. I know Trump is saying that like he'll negotiate, peace with Russia in Ukraine while he's president elect.
Mhm.
That would be nice if he initiated it, but I don't think he's going to actually be able to do much of anything until
Well,
he's
I don't think he legally can.
right. Yeah.
But I also know that, I also know that Trump's team is having conversations with the
Yeah,
Biden
yeah.
team. So, whether it starts at the end of Biden's term and Trump's team just picks it up, or whether it's really being led by Trump's team right now and Biden's team is kind of just doing the official legwork because legally they can. I honestly think Biden's old school and he wants Trump to succeed. So
Yeah.
I don't see them throwing up roadblocks to like Trump trying to do things through the Biden team. So like I can see Trump like working on this stuff right now unofficially, and then
Yeah.
some of it actually being carried out just through the Biden team through the transition process.
Well, the other thing too is I I actually do think that like Biden. So the one thing I do know for sure is that Biden was pretty pissed that he was forced to
Right.
step aside.
Yeah.
And that's pretty obvious in the sense that like he he basically did like a telephone endorsement of Kamala after he supposedly got COVID, which that was maybe he did actually have COVID. Even if that's true, the fact that he never did like that he did like a face to face endorsement until the convention for Harris is very telling. I also think it's very telling that the entire time he was meeting with Trump last week, he had the biggest smile on his face that I've seen from him in a long time. I don't necessarily know if I buy the theory that he voted for Trump, as some people are speculating. Although who knows these days? Politics is wild.
Yeah.
I actually do think that, like, even if he didn't vote for Trump, I think he kind of won. I think he kind of wanted Trump to win just to spite, the Democrats for kind of throwing him out.
I definitely think there's animosity between Biden's team and Kamala's team, and I think there's definitely animosity between his team and just the Democratic Party in general. Like,
yeah,
I mean, they basically threw. I don't agree with everything that Biden has done, but I do think he is in his own way, he is a public servant, and he served his party for 50 years, and they threw him over the bus for a black lady who can't speak coherently or have a single thought in her head that's original. I'd be pissed too. Like,
well,
I relate to Joe.
It's more than that. It's also the sense that, like, even back as far as 2007, 2008, Joe Biden has always kind of been a joke figure within the Democrat Party. Like, even Obama said, yeah, I mean, Joe gas, but I mean, come on, that's Joe, for you. Like, no one in the Democrat Party has ever really respected Biden. I mean, the reason why Obama picked him was to get the liberal white vote, but also because Biden had foreign policy chops that Obama didn't have. And so I think, like, and Biden kind of always knew that he was the shucks, Joe guy too. But I think Biden, for all whatever we may think about the 2020 election, I think that Biden generally thought that he won the 2020 election, and it was finally his time. So to finally be forced aside, after being told that he was doing so well, I think really pissed him off. I would certainly be pissed.
I mean, and Biden is an old school, and I can absolutely see him being pissed off. I mean, he basically was a savior of the Democratic Party in 2020 to stop Bernie Sanders. I mean, like, they came to him, and then they all dropped out, endorsed him, and he, quote, saved the party. And now, because he's old and he doesn't serve a purpose anymore, they just discard him, which ironically is kind of what the hidden message of DEI is, which is like, you're the token white guy, and we'll move you aside if it works for somebody else that we like more.
Well, even in 2020, because I paid attention to the Democrat primary, because I wanted to see who Trump was going to go up against, and I distinctly remember there was a lot of pressure for Biden to pick someone who was diverse and a woman as well. And basically, I think Kamala's appointment basically was like, he was kind of maybe not forced to pick her, but I think she was kind of like, the best choice for him as far as, like, maybe the DEI requirement. But I don't think he. Yeah. I don't think he would have picked her unless he was really nudged to. That's what I'm saying.
No, I agree. I think he was told by somebody, or his advisors told him, you need to pick somebody who's an up-and-comer, who's not white, because that's where the future of the party is, and you're a quote bridge candidate, and this is the person that you'll hand the party off to. But then when Biden was like, I want to run again, I think that's where the animosity really started popping out. because suddenly that bridge candidacy actually was more than a bridge candidacy. It was a I want to run and go through 2 full terms like any incumbent presidents. And that's where I think kind of the internal knives and dynamics came
Yeah.
out.
Well, I also don't think, to be fair though, I don't think that people, I mean, there were Democrats, and they've all since deleted their tweets now, but I mean, the Dems knew that Kamala wasn't a viable presidential candidate, and they all knew that, and
Mhm.
so I think that was also very telling too, was like, they basically all like took a 180 turn from like, oh, of course Joe's gonna run again, because there's no way Kamala can run, to all of a sudden overnight, Kamala's the greatest candidate ever, and she'll be
I mean,
so.
I think, I think, I think those in like leadership in the party, like Pelosi, Schumer, Obama, they knew that she was a weak candidate. But
Yeah,
I don't think all the younger the other Congress people, the other senators, the staffers, I don't think they believed that, and I think they were the ones, along with like these wealthy donors, who also didn't believe that or didn't
right.
know it. They were the
Yeah.
ones who pushed Biden out, and by the size, by the force of their numbers, kind of shoved the party towards this direction. And I think it became pretty clear right after she became the nominee, that she was not a good candidate, and that's where the vibes candidacy kind of came in.
Yeah, well, they hired all these like TikTok,
Hmm.
like the whole campaign was basically like a PR.
Yeah,
I think that they kind of thought in a weird way that they could do what Trump did with like what
yeah,
they were trying to replicate the 2016, I guess, meme wars
right,
candidacy of Trump
yeah,
without ever actually realizing what the meme war, you know, election was.
yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it was the economy, and it is true that like governments across the world are struggling just because of all the things that are going on. And then I do think it was partially how weak a candidate she was, and also how unique a candidate Trump was and is. I think all those things are intertwined. But I honestly think, my opinion is, if the Democratic Party had stuck with Joe Biden, they actually would be in a better position.
Oh yeah, totally.
Because the thing is that the party would, for better or worse, the party would have had a more clear direction if Joe had lost and Trump was going to become president, because the party would have a clear direction to be like, well, let's just become more liberal and go with DEI, which is means that they would have gotten blown out in 2028, but at least then at least for the next 4 years, the party could be like, we know the direction we need to go. Versus now, the party just doesn't know what to do, and it's going to be the republic. It's basically going to be the equivalent of the Republican Party in 2016, where you
Right.
had the gambit, like you had the social conservative Rick Santorums, you had the business friendly Ben Carsons, you had the establishment Jeb Bushes, and, and then there was Trump. Trump was his own Trump was his own thing in 2016, but the thing that he encapsulated was that anti-establishment. I am tired of being told by people the same shit is going to work this time. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a candidate in 2028 on the Democratic side who can kind of encapsulate that is the dark horse that comes out of nowhere and is at least competitive.
Yeah, you're probably right. Oh, I'm actually going to clip that too, to see if to see if that prediction comes
I
true.
mean, I don't know. I can't give you a name right now, so it's
No,
just kind of
no,
a
but
it's just kind of a feeling.
I I think you might be on to something though, for sure.
Yeah. The one caveat I will add to that is more so now than ever though. The Democratic Party is very governed by its elites, and those people love consistency. So I would still, I mean, much as I think that could happen, I would still put my money on like a Josh Shapiro in
Yeah,
2020 because it's safe. He's going to do the moderate, like white guy kind of semi-liberal policies, not rock the boat. And I think that's what the donor class is going to like because it's a message that they agree with.
the Dems are well. So right now, the Dems are they're already floating like Mark Cuban as their like anti-Trump, basically.
Hmm.
The pro,
Yeah, like the businessman who comes out of nowhere or like has a
yeah,
track record and yeah,
yeah,
blows it. Yeah.
yeah. So hey, he's our Donald Trump. He has
Yeah.
reality. He has reality TV show too, and he
Hmm.
also is like but but the problem with the okay the problem with Mark Cuban, and this is the same problem with Oprah too.
Hmm.
I mean, and Oprah's kind of already discovered this the hard way. Both Oprah and Mark Cuban, in their professional careers, were always their whole brand was, "Hey, we're non controversial,"
Yeah.
right? And so for them both to take these really controversial stands in
Hmm.
2024, it really bit them both in the ass.
Yeah.
Cuban especially, since he's like one of the Shark Tank guys.
Hmm.
And so, contrary to what some people are saying, I don't think he's going to be the anti-Trump just because I don't think he can be. He doesn't have the the clout to do so.
Yeah.
Even more so with Oprah. The thing with Trump is he's always kind of been the outlandish, bombastic,
Hmm.
controversial guy for as long as he's been around.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the Democratic Party is just not built for like a business outsider. It can be built it a political outsider can come in. But I don't I a business outsider I don't really see I don't see that happening in the same way it would happen in the Republican Party
yeah,
just because of who makes up who control or who are the Democratic elites. So
right.
that's why I hedge and say like, the party would be better served with an outsider coming in, even if they're just competitive, to have those conversations and start to shape voters' perceptions of we are not just a party of DEI and rich people. Like even if that just occurs in the debates, um, and somebody like Josh Shapiro wins in the end, but it gives the party credibility when it's reaching out to voters to be like, you know what,
Yeah,
we're a broader tent than we were in 2024. But it takes somebody to create that perception, and it takes time to do that.
yeah,
Like we've discussed in this podcast. I don't know if the party if the party intellectuals or the party elites, whatever we want to call them, I don't know if that's where they are. Like they want to keep their power, and because the Democratic Party is primarily a party of interest groups, their interests are actually ironically to lose or keep
yeah,
losing because they still can control, they still have their power. Rich people are not suddenly going to get poor under Trump. So like to them this is more kind of like theoretical, these are our values, but it doesn't really have an economic impact on us. So they're fine with pushing this. They might be fine with pushing this kind of thing because they're not negatively impacted in their day-to-day lives, versus it's much more real for the average Republican power broker or the average Republican voter who actually drives the direction of the party.
Yeah, well, as Max and I discussed in our private group chat, like all these woke companies are still going to push out woke stuff in 2025, like Disney
Yeah.
and Sony, because a lot of that stuff is already in the can and has already
Yep. Yep.
been produced. But as the years go by, I think you are going to see even the Dems kind of, and a lot of these companies. I mean, they're already trying to kind of distance themselves from a lot of the woke stuff that they
Mhm.
can,
Yeah.
and that's really their only option going forward, is that they have to distance themselves from some of these, really fringe policies.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're not going to win.
Well, they're gonna lose money.
Yeah.
I mean, business is gonna follow its bottom line, and so if business is losing money, they're going to change hands and not pursue it.
Yep.
And politics is also involved in that, and that politics is following what businesses do, or businesses are following the political trends, which generally then translate to business. Then I think, I think it will be moderated. I don't think that the Democratic Party or big business or big companies, whatever, I don't think they're ever going to fully give up D, but I think it's going to become much more strategic and targeted.
Yeah.
For like, so like as an example, for like Marvel movies, instead of just gratuitously throwing out, like, I think it was the the Marvels or something like that, where they had the three teenager female superheroes,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
really convoluted mess, and you could tell that they were in there, or you could tell that they were in there because they needed DEI, but Brie Larson was so toxic that they couldn't even bring Brie Larson back into it, so they dropped her, and it was
Right.
just terrible, and they lost a ton of money. But then you have Avenger movies that do super duper well, that have black characters, white characters, women, men, Hispanic, blacks. I think it's going to become much more strategic in that the major figures, say in movies, are going to actually once again fit the role versus just being thrown in there so you can check a diversity box.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what Hollywood is learning too, is like
Yeah.
people don't hate diversity. You just have to like do it well and not
Right.
force.
Like if you have a black focused, like a black history or a black culture focused movie, nobody's going to bat an eyelash if your main characters are black. But if you have a movie that's like a remake of a white superhero movie or whatever, and you make the character, I don't know, a Hispanic woman or Hispanic transgender
Yeah,
woman, then people are going to be like, what the f is this? Like, this is not my movie. Like, what are you doing?
yeah, yeah. Well, it's the old Netflix meme of like of like Cinderella, and then Cinderella's like
But yes,
like
and Cinderella's, I can't remember her name, but the main character who's playing Cinderella in the new Disney live action, like, she's
yeah,
she's the epitome of DEI, and I really wish you would STFU, because you're gonna cost us like millions of dollars with this movie because you're so unlikable.
yeah. Well, they they never learned that lesson with with the Little Mermaid, or
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think like I said, I think DEI and wokeism, I don't think it's going to go away. I think it will just kind of,
No,
like a wave, it'll recede a little bit.
yeah. Well, I mean, there's always been. So the thing with woke is there's always been woke in Hollywood, like even going back to like the late 80s. But like nobody called it woke back
Yeah,
then because we
yeah.
didn't. The thing of it was like there's always been like left wing propaganda in movies. They were just a lot more subtle about it.
Hmm.
Now they just shove it in everybody's face, and they're a lot more
Yeah.
blatant about it.
Yeah, you know,
So
the analogy I think of for that is the Revenge of the Sith, which was like the sixth Star Wars movie, but technically it's the third in the series.
yeah,
And you could tell that, and George Lucas is a well-known liberal. It's no surprise, and he hated the
yeah,
Iraq War, and the Iraq War was going on back then, and so he threw in a couple lines in the movie that you could definitely tell were like alluding to the Iraq War, like when Senator Padme is watching Emperor Palpatine be like, "We're going to reorder the Republic into the first galactic empire," she says. So this is how democracy dies, with thunderous applause, in reference to
yeah,
like all the democracies that have fallen from people who fall for authoritarian dictators. And then there's when they're fighting on Mustafar, Anakin and Obi-Wan, and so Obi-Wan's trying to bring Anakin back from the dark side, and so Anakin eventually says like, "Well, if you're not with me, you're against me," which is an allusion to what George Bush said when he was talking about the axis of evil before the Iraq War. Like there were those kinds of subtle things that if that you had to
right,
be in the know to know were political references and kind of reflected the preferences of the actors or the director. But
yeah.
it wasn't so in your face. Like, you kind of had to pay attention to catch those things. And didn't shape your perception of like the franchise or the actors or the directors, because you're kind of like, oh, they're liberals.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think the other thing too was I think social media, maybe not in the early days, but definitely by like the mid 2010s, also became a big part because now everyone had the ability to like put out these ideas, and
Yeah,
they might not have been good ideas, but if they got views, oh well,
yeah.
all the better. So.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I hope in the end that Trump's election kind of leads to this recalibration, and
Yeah,
I just think society in general would be better if we started to look at each other as not a check mark and as an actual person, and we start actually having conversations around how do we make people's lives better in real tangible ways versus just saying like, well, I value you because you fit a DEI checkbox.
that's my hope. I mean that's one thing that I've always tried to do here on the podcast, you know particularly within the last like 7 or 8 years even. I mean I talk politics with you and Adam and some of the other guys, but like I also have authors and other people on who aren't even political because like I feel like there's a lot of noise, and I'm just willing to talk out people, about whatever on, the show and see
Yeah,
people as human.
right, yeah, and I think I think people. I mean, I think people want to be seen as people. But
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people want to be defined by just their external features. Like if your main feature is you're white or you're black or you're Caucasian or you're African American, even even being a Caucasian says nothing about your historical
Right.
heritage. Being an African American says nothing about your historical heritage. Tell somebody from, I don't know, Zaire that they're the same as somebody from the Congo. That's not, it's not true. So like those external things that are superficial in nature, that don't
Yeah.
really tell you anything about the person. I think the fact that our politics is becoming more diversified is actually better, because you can't stereotype people and
Yeah.
fit them into a box. I mean, like, it used to be like, if you're black, I can assume 9 out of 10 that you're always going to be a Democrat, or that you are a Democrat, and
Right.
or Hispanic, like, or Asian, like 7 out of 10. And now that's not true anymore. And I think that's a good thing
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons.
Even someone like me who, is in a wheelchair, my disability is fairly obvious. If you didn't know me, people would like automatically assume that I was a liberal, and even in my early days of being like a conservative commentator, like I definitely had offers to be the quote unquote conservative wheelchair guy, and I could have grifted off that and made a bunch of money, but I chose not to, because I didn't want the right to be, to do the identity politics, because I
Yeah.
don't think that helps anything either.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
it,
it's part of who we are, but
yeah,
it doesn't.
it doesn't define. Yeah, I mean, like and like I said, really, like I don't even really focus on politics in this show as much as I used to. Like I focus more on the fact that like I'm a writer, and like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
write political thrillers. And my friend who's also an author and who also served in the special forces, wants to come on. Oh, so what's your perspective as someone who served overseas?
Right.
On
Right.
XYZ topic. So,
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
like that. So,
And I think that ties into what we've discussed about, like, the media becoming diversified, so people can hear these differing opinions and just get different ideas and thoughts. And I think at the end of the day, that's all a good thing. I think we've seen where groupthink has kind of led this country, and it's not,
yeah.
so far it's not been good. I don't know why that would change, but
Yeah, hopefully we'll learn, and I'm optimistic that we already kind of have, but hopefully we
yeah,
continue to learn that like groupthink and identity politics and tribalism isn't doing us any favors.
yeah, yeah, and in lots of aspects of our society. So I think I call it kind of getting back to a sense of normalcy, but what is it? What's a meme I saw on Twitter? Bringing sanity back, or something like that. I kind of look at it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, anyway, man, I don't want to keep you, too much longer. I know we said an hour and a half, but here we are, 2 hours and
I know. I think we've blown past the timer.
That's just that's typical for the Whitfield report at this point. Honestly, there's kind of been this whole meme that I pretty much do the Joe Rogan thing now. But it's really easy to go on for 2 to 3 hours sometimes, just talking. So which is all.
Yeah, it's an organic conversation. Like, people enjoy each other's company. I think this is what people like about online media, is that
Yeah,
it's a conversation. It's not necessarily a debate. It's two people enjoying each other's company, and the fact that people can watch it means that they get to enjoy your company. And it in a way, it is the benefit of social media, to the degree that
yeah.
you can find camaraderie with people that you never would know of or find camaraderie with.
It's the whole reason why I got into podcasting, going on 18 years now, honestly. So,
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a benefit of social media. I know we hear all the time about the negatives of social
yeah.
media, There are some benefits to it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, if if it wasn't for social media, I mean, I have so many friends who, like yourself, who I never would have met, who I'm closer to in some ways than I am people who I went to high school with. So,
Mhm.
but anyway, well, do you mentioned, I think either you or Adam mentioned you have a podcast or something that you do on occasion, or
I do on occasion. It is on hiatus right now until I actually have a little bit more time to focus on it. Um, but we do have a website, American Watchman.org, and then I
yeah,
also have a WordPress blog which I sporadically post articles to. It's a red voter at WordPress.com. So I occasionally post articles there primarily on like election analysis and things like that. But mostly I've just been nerding out with all the analysis on Twitter.
yeah,
I
yeah.
I'm one of those bad people who gets their most of their electoral news from Twitter, but that's because the analysis from Twitter is ironically better than almost anywhere else.
Oh, it is too. Well, and like especially like I've always been an Elon Musk fan, like even before it became like political, just because I always thought his whole thing with like rockets and electric
Mm-hmm.
vehicles are cool. But like honestly, Elon Musk becoming like a champion of like conservative values
Mm-hmm.
would have never been on my bingo card like 5 years ago. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think what was it a fun stat for your audience was before Elon Musk took over Twitter or X, the user like analysis of like political preferences, it was like 65 Dem, 30 Republican or something like that, or conservative liberal, and now it's almost dead even in terms of
yeah,
the split. But I mean, the people that I follow on Twitter tend to be like conservative election
oh
nerds.
yes,
So they built like these different election models that tried to predict out the votes in all the swing states, and their analysis was better. Like their analysis was more in depth and better than you could find anywhere else. And these are people who are doing it in their spare time, who are not really
right.
making any money off it. And so they have no reason to lie. Like they have no incentive to lie. They want their models to be right, but they're not making any money off the result one way or the other. So I've just found that it's a lot more refreshing to see that type of analysis, and I can form my own opinions from the data that they provide versus listening to some talking head on 5 or 10 minutes on for 5 or 10 minutes say the same crap that we've all heard 100 times that gives me
Yeah.
no additional information.
Yeah, I mean same thing. And I mean like I've always used Twitter as like a news aggregate feed just to
Mm-hmm.
check like news in real time and get like both the left wing and right wing talking points and like sort out the fact from the middle there. And I think that's a lot better. So you're active on Twitter still then I take it, and that's good.
Yep, yeah, I still am. I mean, I mostly do electoral analysis, but yeah, I'm still active on Twitter. Generally it's just reposting other people's stuff. I don't have the time to build an election model, but there's good takes on Twitter and bad takes on Twitter.
Yeah.
But I just generally follow, at least this time, I just generally follow the people who are right or much more even keeled in their analysis than some others I've seen.
Yeah, well, that's good. I just wanted to give you a chance to promote, anything that you might have, hopefully if you get, more time, like I'd love to help you promote your podcast. Definitely, I mean, I think I'd love to get, American Watchmen and perhaps do the right to offend American Watchmen merger like we've talked talked about or something. I definitely think there's a lot of potential in the future. So
Yeah, 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 I think so too. So yeah,
but
that'd be cool.
Anyway, man, well, I want to thank you and also to Adam both for coming on, and real appreciate you coming on to chat with me on Monday night, and thanks to you folks for tuning in, listening, and if you've made it this far, you're awesome. So
yes, thank you to your audience for sticking with us as long as they have. But I really enjoyed it.
Oh, they're used to 3-hour live
Well, there you
streams
go,
on Wednesdays. So
then they can just watch this on Wednesday.
Yeah, or tomorrow since it's Tuesday.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
But to the folks listening, Max and I will see you on Wednesday for the Thanksgiving live stream, and we might have a couple of guests pop in as well. So you Gabe, are certainly welcome to come if you're available. But if not, I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving, and I'm sure we'll talk before the holidays in the year's end. So
absolutely, yeah. Happy Thanksgiving to you too, Sam, and to your audience as well.
All right, sounds good. We'll talk at you Wednesday, folks, and thanks for listening.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.